Hi there, this is Gabor and you are watching Agile is Us. So today is going to be quite an unconventional episode in the life of Agile is Us because I will be reading a story from a children's book. How did this come about? A good friend and facilitator, Charles-Louis, was traveling from Brussels to London to attend Scrum Exchange in 2019. And on the way, on the train, he read a Grimm's tale. And he was somehow inspired by that story, so he decided to sort of build and improvise a workshop around it. And it was wildly successful among us because I guess we could relate to that story in a way. And I was inspired by that very much so. I actually took that story back to my workplace at that time and I shared that story among fellow Scrum Masters. But then I said, from my own experience, do I have a story like that? Do I have a story like that Grimm's tale? And immediately this book came up to me, which is by a Hungarian author. It is read to Hungarian kids, and a lot of Hungarian kids will know what's in this book. They will all know the characters, but of course this book is mostly unknown to an English-speaking population. But thankfully I could find a translation of this book. This was just released in, I think, 2021. And I took it to the Scrum Exchange in 2022, just this May. And after reading the first chapter to them and asking, how do you relate to some of these characters? And after, discussing some motives and some character traits in this book, they said, I wanna know how that story continues. So do you have a copy of this book? And I unfortunately had to turn it down, but then now I managed to get a few copies. So after reading this, the second chapter from this book, I'm just heading to the post box and just going to post it to some of you. Before we get there, let me just read the second chapter from the book. Maminty, the little green fairy. Today we're off to cut down a tree, said Mucklemucky. Only the strong need volunteer. Marty Mouse, don't bother raising your head. You're weak. Me? Weak? Exclaimed Marty Mouse indignantly to his neighbor as he lifted a pine cone with one arm. Just feel my muscles. As it happened, Seraphim Horse the blue steed was standing next to him. He looked down shyly, seeking the greyish mouse among the grey leaf mould, and said tremulously, I don't dare feel them. You'd be crushed for sure, though I must say you do have superb muscles. I told you, said Marty Mouse, and strutted cockily into the forest, because it was a day for tree felling after all. But a lumberjack brigade did come together in the end. Mucklemucky as foreman and forestry expert, Louis the Brute, the softest-hearted of behemoths, Siegfried Bruckner, the loud-mouthed old lion, Aromo, the rabbit with the unstoppable cerebrum, the blue-colored Seraphim Horse as mentioned above, Zoard the Great, the walking pine tree, and the taciturn Tumtetum. And of course Cattikit, who wasn't very strong, but said that the company shouldn't be without a person of refinement, and who would be more suitable than her. The foreman didn't deign to answer. Louis the Brute stared with a gaping mouth. He'd never seen a real-life person of refinement. Siegfried Bruckner curled his lip contemptuously. Aromo slapped his knee in laughter. Who'd ever heard of anyone more refined than he was? Seraphim Horse pondered over what use a person of refinement might be for lopping trees. Zoard the Great, the walking tree, shook his head, and all Tumtetum said was Tumter, followed after a pause by Tum. Even so they took Cattikit along. Of course. Naturally. For secretly they all loved her, as Cattikit secretly knew. Once in the depths of the forest, Mucklemucky chose a good tree, a eucalyptus. This will make the best ship, he said. "But yesterday it was an airplane you wanted to build," Katikit clucked. Mucklemäki glanced at her scornfully. "Airship," he said through pursed lips. "Never heard of one? In water, it's a ship. In the air, it's a plane. On dry land, it's a train." This answer amazed everyone. No doubt about it, Mucklemäki was the boss. He had the brains and the entrepreneurial spirit. They were all rather inexperienced at felling trees, though, and began to argue over how to start. "Let's have breakfast first," said Siegfried Bruckner. They shouted him down, not least because it was 2 in the afternoon, though they knew that Siegfried Bruckner was capable of breakfasting at any hour of day. In fact, he could breakfast from morning till night. And they argued on. Did they start with the axe and continue with the saw, or the other way around? Where should they stand? Which way should the tree fall? Which way should they run? Zoar the Great, the walking pine tree, said straight off that it was really improper to chop down a tree. While others were arguing, 3 stepped aside, namely Siegfried Bruckner, Louis the Brute, and Tumtutum. Siegfried Bruckner had some breakfast while the other 2 took a saw and zum began to saw the tree. By the time the argument was over and Siegfried Bruckner was midway through his breakfast, they had nearly finished the job. "Timber! Watch out, it's going to fall!" they cried. "Just so long as it doesn't fall on my breakfast," Siegfried Bruckner told them with his mouth full. They started to shout at Tumtutum and Louis the Brute. "Don't stand like that! Pull here! Tighten here! Loosen there! Mind your head! Mind your left! And below! And above! Lift! Let go! Push! Tug! Kick! Cut! Hammer!" If all they had done was shout, that'd have been no problem, but sadly they pitched into and yanked and shoved and walloped and tugged at poor Louis the Brute and Tumtutum. The eucalyptus creaked and fell. They leapt in 100 directions, but in the stampede, poor Tumtutum couldn't get away. Wham! The tree landed on his back. "Tumtutum! Tumtutum!" he wailed in agony. The others rushed back. Even Siegfried Bruckner left off his breakfasting and ran over. They tried to help. "Pull him out by the leg! Grab his arms! Grab his head!" they shouted. "Don't be ridiculous! We've got to lift the tree!" growled Mucklemäki. They set to. But for all their efforts it wouldn't budge, while ever more faintly came from beneath the tree, "Tum-to-tum! We can't do it! We can't do it!" wailed Katikit. "If that's being a person of refinement, you can eat it!" groaned Siegfried Bruckner at her sweating, and added sadly, "For breakfast!" At this, Katikit joined them in lifting. But the tree wouldn't budge. Suddenly they heard a thin voice behind them. "I'll help," somebody tinkled. They all turned their heads. At first they saw nothing, even though Seraphim Horse had put on his spectacles. Of course they could hardly have seen anything, because whoever was speaking to them could hardly be seen among the grass. She was as big as my little finger, a tiny green girlie, in green clothes, with green hair, green eyes, and a green cap on her head, with a green diamond on it the size of a poppy seed. But because it was so sparkly, they did finally spot her. "Aha!" said Mucklemäki, "a fancily dressed grasshopper." "I'm not a grasshopper!" shouted the teeny-weeny girl. "I'm Maminty." "Don't disturb us. We are rescuing Tum-to-Tum," Katikit told her. Again they set about the tree. Tum-to-Tum sobbed. "Tum-to-Tum! Tum-to-Tum!" The green girl tried to elbow her way in, but Zoar the Great gently pushed her aside. "Don't get in the way," he groaned. And so Meminti ran around them, but she couldn't get to the tree. She kept bumping into Seraphim Horse's shanks, or Mucklemeckie's elbow, or Siegfried Bruckner's mane, or Aromo's side, or Ketikit's thumb. "Let me in! Let me in!" she shouted. Mucklemeckie turned to her. "Go away! This moment! Be off with you! Run! Skedaddle! Disappear! Can't you see you're in the way? Can't you see we are rescuing Tum-Tum?" Meminti, the tiny green girl, lost her temper. Sparks flashed from her green eyes. "Fools!" she said. She took a green wand from her clothes. It was a quarter as big as a toothpick. She waved it. They all turned into pillars of salt. Only their eyes rolled in fear. Meminti walked through them to the tree, which she lifted with one arm. "Climb out," she said. Tum-Tum climbed out and felt his back relieved. "Tum-Tum," he said. That meant, "Thank you." Then he said Tum-Tum again, and that meant, "If possible, change this lot back." Again, Meminti waved her wand in the air. They returned to normal. They were most grateful. Only Siegfried Bruckner grumbled. "I hope you haven't turned my breakfast into salt." The others laughed. They placed Meminti on Seraphim Horse's blue back and took her home with shouts of victory, where she lives in their midst to this day. So this is the second chapter from the book. I forgot to mention the title. The author's name is Lazar Ervin in Hungarian, or in English Ervin Lazar. And the title of the book is The Square Around Forest. And it is full of lovely stories like this one. So maybe you want to reflect on this a bit. Who can you relate to? What sort of role did Meminti had in the story? How were the others blocking her? What sort of a team is this? What can you see? What can you observe? And maybe how can you relate to the story to your life at work, or to the work of somebody that you know? So this is the end of this episode at Agile is Us. Hopefully this sparks you and sparks your imagination. I hope it brings some creativity to your thinking. And if it does, please like and subscribe and be prepared for the next one. And now, I'm off to send 3 copies of this book to 3 special friends. Stay tuned. Bye.